So to log unhandled exceptions, we're going to use a very popular package called Elma. In Package Manager console, install package Elma. Elma stands for Error Login Modules and Handlers. The way it works is that it plugs into the request processing pipeline, and if there is an unhandled exception, it will grab its details and store it. By default, it stores these details in the memory, but with a small configuration, you can have it store exceptions in different kinds of databases. Now let's see this in action. Back to the browser, I'm going to go to home/about to throw an exception. Now for your information, I've changed the custom error settings to remote only, and that's why you're seeing the exception details here locally. But let's say we have deployed our application to the production, and a few exceptions have happened here and there. To see these exceptions, we can navigate to elma.axt. So Elma registers this endpoint, and when we hit this endpoint, we see the exceptions Elma has captured. So we can see the host, the type of the exception, the error message, the user who got that exception, as well as date and time. Now here's the beauty. If we click on this link, details, we see a page that simulates the yellow screen of death. So we can see the exception message as well as the stack trace. In this case, I can see that this exception happened in the About action in Home Controller on line 19. And if we scroll down, we can see server variables at the time the exception happened. So all this data help us troubleshoot the problem. Now a couple of things here. First of all, this endpoint elma.axt is only accessible locally for security reasons. When you deploy your application and you want to access this remotely, you need to do a bit of configuration. In web.config, search for elma.axt. You see this location element. And inside this location element, we have the familiar web.config structure. So we have system.web. Inside system.web, we have HTTP handlers. So Elma registers a handler for this path, elma.axt. So when we hit that endpoint, this class, error log page factory, is executed. This class is essentially an HTTP handler, and it's similar to an action in MVC. But unlike an action, it's not part of a framework. It's a class with one method that gets the request and returns a response. And it's a very low-level way of processing requests. And these days, having frameworks like MVC, you don't really need to create HTTP handlers unless you want to create a framework. So moving on, we have this section, authorization. I'm going to take this out of the comment. Now with this code, we are authorizing anyone who is in the admin role to access this endpoint. And we are denying all other users. We can also change this to users. So if there are specific users who can access that endpoint, we can add them here. For example, admin@vidly.com, comma, other users. Now, when we save web.config, our web application is restarted. And because by default, Elma stores exception details in memory, our log will be cleared. So when we get back here, look, there are no exceptions. So have a look at the Elma documentation to find the configuration you need to add to store the exception details in SQL Server. Elma also has a few other useful features. For example, you can configure it to send emails when it logs exceptions. But I leave all this to you as additional reading. So remember Elma? Use it, it's a great tool.